Calling this meeting to order. This is a Redmond City Council study session held on Tuesday, June 11th, 2024, commencing at 7 p.m. Council members in attendance are Councilmember Stewart, Councilmember Nueva Camina, Councilmember Salahuddin, Council Vice President Forsyth, Councilmember Fields, Councilmember Anderson, and myself, Council President Kritzer. And we also have many Parks, Trails, and Recreation Commissioners here today. There are 3 items on our agenda tonight: a joint meeting with the Parks, Trails, and Recreation Commission, Redmond 2050, Planning Commission recommendation on residential regulations, and council talk time. The first item on the agenda is the joint meeting with the Parks, Trails, and Recreation Commission. It's great to see you all. Laureen Hamilton, Parks and Recreation Director, will introduce this item. Go ahead.
Good evening, Council. I'm Laureen Hamilton, the Parks and Recreation Director here at the City of Redmond. I'm joined this evening by our Parks, Trails, and Recreation Commission, which is a fully volunteer commission who works alongside staff and provides recommendations both to city leadership as well as park staff on what do you know? Parks, Trails, and Recreation. So I'm really excited that they've joined us. They have brought forward just a slide deck of priorities they've been working on and that they are looking forward to working on into the coming year. And so I'm going to hand this item off to Cameron Zapata, our Senior Parks Planner, who is our staff liaison for this commission.
Good evening. I'm Cameron Zapata, Senior Parks Planner, and I'm here tonight to introduce the Parks, Trails, and Recreation Commission. And they'll be sharing their accomplishments over the last year, as well as their priorities for this upcoming year. The Commission provides recommendations to the City Council, and then they act as a bridge between the community and city staff and ensures that residents' input is represented. Lastly, the Commission offers valuable community-based insights to staff, and they help to enhance city services and projects. And we thank you for that. And now I'll pass it off to Garrett Michaud, the Parks, Trails, and Recreation Commission Chair, for their presentation.
Thank you, Cameron. All right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you to the City Council, Mayor, and staff for providing us this platform tonight to highlight our activities. A fair amount has transpired since we last met in October of 2023. We're here to bring you up to speed on the near-term progress that's been made in that time, as well as flag some medium and long-term projects that are important to our commission. Excellent. Okay, for the agenda. My name is Garrett Michaud, and I am the chair of the commission for this current session. This group before you is full of passionate residents with diverse backgrounds and expertise, and who champion the public use of recreational space. For tonight's presentation, we've organized things in sort of a chronological order, beginning with near-term accomplishments and activations, covering those relevant changes that exist in the medium term, and then ending with long-term potential. So finally, we've set aside some time at the very end to allow for a Q&A session to address any specific questions that you might have, anything prompted by the PowerPoint. Okay, so who are we? Our commission plays an advisory role to the city, yet we're prepared to function as a more dynamic team as needed. So as active residents in our community, we can be eyes and ears for the city, as everyone before you was a park, trail, or recreational user first before volunteering for this role. And most, if not all of us, are still heavy users of the system. Or we can lend an extra pair of hands for special events when the time comes, and many of us have the blisters and bug bites still to prove it. All right. Go ahead.
Good evening, my name is Christina Wayland, and I'm going to talk about some of the recent accomplishments from this past year. First of all, the Southeast Redmond Park Master Plan had a high level of community involvement, as many of you were at some of those meetings, and we talked about that last year. That was approved by council in April. Clint will speak about the next step in the development of the Southeast Redmond Park a little bit later in our presentation. In the downtown core, we have the Luke McRedmond Pop-Up Dog Park. It's back for a second year. And there's a new pop-up park at Hartman Park on Education Hill. Last year's pop-up dog park received an overwhelming positive response from our surveys. And we understand there may be a 2025-2026 CIP item to fund a permanent dog park at Luke McRedmond, and we ask council to support that request. Additional community gardens were installed at Jewel Park with the remaining budget dollars. We understand city staff plan to install more plots in the downtown core. There are proposed community garden plots in the master plan for the Southeast Redmond Park, and many new multifamily communities, or multifamily developments, I should say, are installing community gardens as part of their development. We're really excited as a group that this is just kind of becoming normal and not something that we have to ask for and advocate for, and I'm sure you as council feel the same. We appreciate your support of the community garden expansion. Last month's grand opening of the Redmond Senior and Community Center was a fabulous event, and as a commission, we want to thank council, this council, prior councils, staff, prior staff, for all the work that went into that. That was a huge accomplishment for the year. Another thing that we've talked about in the past is getting some information kind of on our website and out into the community. And city staff have developed some trail loop maps. Stuart's going to talk more about that later. That's been a big accomplishment for us this year as well. 2024's National Trails Day event was on June 1st at Jewel Park. Approximately 25 volunteers spread 40 cubic yards of hog fuel on a quarter-mile path. We want to thank council members who were able to volunteer, and Greg is going to speak some more about volunteerism later in our presentation. The improvement of Redmond's parks, trails, and recreation is something that takes all of us working together, and we appreciate council's support in the past and look forward to your support in the future. And I'm going to hand off to Stuart.
Thank you. Stuart Hargraves, good evening. What you're seeing here is two of our walking routes that we have developed. The communication department developed these with input from the commission. We're currently working on a third. I believe that one's going to be called Downtown Redmond Parks Loop. And we've got a couple more in the pipeline as well. And so I think as a next step for wayfinding, really what the commission would love to see is we'd like to see the city invest in new and additional wayfinding assets for our city to enhance walkability, call out places of interest, orient people to things like the new Redmond light rail station or the transit center, things like that. And just to point out that our LTAC applicant actually kind of did my job for me here by laying out some really interesting scenarios that visitors to Redmond might benefit from wayfinding around, how do I get to Marymore Park? How do I find a hike? How do I walk downtown? I think these are all really excellent scenarios and use cases for wayfinding. And when I say wayfinding, I'm really talking about probably physical signage, maps, arrows, directions, things like that. But I wouldn't limit us to that either. And I think if the commission has an ask of city council, it would be to fund a consultant or something like that who can actually develop that concept and build out what a vision for wayfinding and walkability around Redmond looks like. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks. Good evening, Greg Laird. I want to emphasize the importance of your continued support in the volunteer program within the city. There is a significant interest in volunteering for all types of projects with parks and recreation throughout the city. That involvement of our citizens and staff and council really helps support a strong sense of community. They take a little more pride in just a little piece of the community. So that support there, I think it's important to help foster that stronger sense of community. And it's important because staff is needed to help identify opportunities, timely notification of these, so that people can easily sign up. They get a reminder. And when it's done, they get a little notification of appreciation, a little update on how the progress is, and maybe a follow-up as to another opportunity. And all of those kind of coordination elements need staff time. And so if there's one thing we could ask to help support the volunteer program is to have a strong sense of timely commitment of staff time to support that program. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Talk a little bit about the Southeast Redmond Neighborhood Park. So this project is really an excellent example of a community-led design. There were multiple points of input along the way for design choices that were all taken directly from residents' input, primarily residents within the Southeast Redmond neighborhood right there. So it was started off, I think it was last summer, with a really great event for everybody to put their ideas up on big boards. So as currently designed, where it's at right now, it has gathering spaces, open areas, walking paths, a really unique plateau lookout, and a community garden. And it really has everything encompassed that everyone gave their input in from the beginning through multiple designs and came out with this final design, although it may change along the way as we go. So this is a 3.2 acre site that can truly be a premier example for the city of Redmond of what a neighborhood park can be, given it encompasses everything that everybody said they wanted from the neighborhood itself. So I would just say, as a Parks, Trails, and Recreation Commission, our pitch to you, the council, would be this. We think a neighborhood park like Southeast Redmond is a rare opportunity to actually implement a community-first design. And we ask that you support that, this project during the budget deliberations this fall. Thank you.
Gary Smith, looking at the East Redmond corridor. I'll try to keep my discipline as the fellow commissioners to hold it to 3 or 4 minutes. But I would ask your indulgence for 1 minute of history going back to the 1960 census. Probably most of you weren't around at that time, except maybe Steve Fields and I got caught up in that census in 1960. The population of Redmond at that time was 1,500 people. And most of you wouldn't know, even if you've been here a while, there was at the same time town of East Redmond. Had 500 people spread over a much larger area. And now you fast forward a couple years ago, the park staff brought to our attention the East Redmond Corridor Master Plan. It was done in 2009, been sitting on a shelf, and they dusted it off and said this might be the time to implement that plan. Of course, things had changed. East Redmond was disincorporated, and that's been annexed, so the city has that property, and they're looking to how to integrate it into the city and provide access and routes to find that area easily on foot or by bike. Over the past 6 months, we decided to form a subcommittee to look more carefully at that. There are 4 of us that work more closely and spend a lot of time walking the ground to find out the real problems. It's quite a complex plan, and it has all kinds of barriers and gaps in the potential links to those 6 parks. The staff, again, provided support in terms of park plan projects, mostly trail projects. In fact, most of the near-term trail projects that were in the plan are in the East Redmond corridor. So I give kudos to the staff and my fellow subcommittee members for tramping around the woods with me, but I do want to look a little bit at the details to, first of all, show you the layout. If you look at this depiction, it's odd because north's at the right side of the map and south is to the left. Starting, if you can see, on the far south was Southeast Redmond Park. That was not in the original plan, but since it's been developed now, or in the process of development, we hope to add it to the park plan. And there's a gap, of course, between that park and Arthur Johnson Park, the furthest south that shows up in green there. It's about 3/4 of a mile with several private parcels in between. Looking at the next gap, I think it's labeled number 2 between Arthur Johnson and Martin Park. It's only a 50-foot gap, but it is in the form of Union Hill Road, which is kind of hard to run across these days. We're looking at ways to connect the 2 parks. You'll then see in number 3, Bear Nivens Creek Trail, which is the only 12-foot hard surface trail that is in the corridor right now. It was built in 2006 before the master plan. I was there as a trail commissioner when they opened it. And it's a fine park trail, park connecting trail. I think it's one of the best of the city parks still. Then you go up further, that trail on the ground ends at Conrad Olson Road at the farm, and there's a gap labeled number 4, which leads up to Farrell McWhirter Park, and that's a half mile of essentially private property with no real route on the ground. Next up is number 5, a very short gap, actually the Puget Sound Trail, Power Line Trail, that some of you helped improve the connection. I think Melissa was throwing hog fuel all over that area last week on Trails Day. So that is now connected, but it's a soft surface trail. I'd like to look at the next slide then to show you our future plan. Now, I've probably exceeded my time limit, and I'll just leave it up there and point out a couple items on it. The idea is to show these green trails as a ring, and you look at the gaps, which are the ovals. The first gap at the bottom, labeled 2025, is the trail that will run alongside Sound Transit Rail, due to be open next year. So that gap will be filled, connecting the Redmond Central Connector with East Lake Sammamish Trail. That then leaves the gaps on the east side. We've looked at those already to show the distances between Southeast Redmond going north all the way up to Jewel Park. That's the challenge, I think. And I put it on the order of the Redmond Central Connector. The total mileage just within the East Redmond corridor is over 3 miles. And I think the Redmond Central Connector is something like 4 miles. So it's on that order of distance, and it's actually more complicated. I'll just point out, we don't have a particular ask. I've been dissuaded from making budget requests. But the one thing that's, I think, is obvious from this map, the gray area at the bottom and the right is King County jurisdiction. And most of the connectors that have to be made are in that jurisdiction. So I put the plea to you, elected officials, to find a partnership with the county. It should be possible to make an agreement that would ease the acquisition of new parcels and, probably more important, smooth the permit process to actually put in trails and some of the amenities we want to see there. I think with this kind of work, with the cooperation of city and county, that we could end up with what's called the green ring that would encircle Redmond. Who knows, could be done in 15 years. I think it takes that amount of time, which the Redmond Central Connector did, but this would provide a link from the urban areas to what is still a semi-rural area and really a pastoral setting on the east side. And that's the enthusiasm that we generated in our discussions with former council members, with John Couch and others who've been involved with this area for a long time. I think it's really a future that's worth pursuing, and we're really upbeat about the revival of the East Redmond Corridor Master Plan. Thank you. Oh, I think it's back to you, Gary.
All right. Well, thank you for all the commissioners who presented their thoughts tonight. At this time, we'd like to open up the floor for any questions you'd like answered. And we're happy to go into greater detail about any particular topic, and we really look forward to sharing our findings with you. So.
Thank you so much. Really, just great to go into this discussion thinking about the green ring around Redmond. So I'll open it up to council members. Councilmember Salahuddin.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you to all the commissioners for presenting. I have one comment, and then I'll ask a question specific to the East Redmond master plan. I guess the corridor master plan that is being proposed, no ask. Definitely throwing out there just in my connection with work with King County, the Conservation Futures land acquisition program, and so would love to connect offline on that and and see what opportunities there are there. My question is specific to, I think, two commissioners who haven't spoken. The youth representatives would love to hear from you. I think it's awesome that you're a part of this commission, and would love to hear sort of what you like about Redmond Parks, but also what you would like to see parks, recreation, and trails, what you might want to see, just knowing that of everyone in this room, you might be the likeliest to enjoy them in 2050.
How do you turn this thing on? Okay. So firstly, I'm a big mountain biker, and that's partly why I got into this Parks and Rec Commission. I love mountain biking a lot, and I've seen places like Issaquah and Sammamish have various biking trails and a variety of different types of trails for different bikes, and that is one of the main reasons why I got on the commission, was to see the implementation of different types of trails and volunteerism opportunities, specifically with the bike park, or in this case, National Trails Day, which I don't think we've talked about yet, but that is something that I really appreciated. But yeah, that's what I would like to see.
Okay. So what I'd like to say is what I really want to look more forward to is more volunteerism opportunities, especially for more people to get involved in the community. I really liked the National Trails Day. I was not able to attend, but I heard that it was really successful and there was a lot of more opportunities. I know that Cameron is also working on more volunteerism opportunities, more places for, I would say, yeah, wayfinding. Sometimes when you go hiking or if you go on trails, I find it difficult sometimes to get around the place, and I feel like we're doing a really good job with like wayfinding and making that a lot easier. But I would specifically say volunteerism is just something that I want to see more enhanced. But we are, I'm pretty sure, doing a really, really good job in that, and also advertising that to the community and the public so that they can get involved with all these like opportunities to get involved with community. So yeah.
Thank you.
Other questions? Council Vice President Forsyth.
Thank you, and thank you all for serving. This is one of my favorite commissions. I was the chair of the Parks Committee when I first got on council, and just like love our parks and trails. I think they're great, and I love it when you guys visit us and there's a ton of synergy in what you are asking and what we are asking for. So the things that I picked up on that we've been talking about were wayfinding to make sure that folks can get around, safe bike routes, make sure that those are called out on wayfinding, the bike connections, community gardens and dog parks. I know that was started a couple years back, and we were all very happy to lobby for those things, and I'm glad they're still going and potentially going to be permanent dog park and more community gardens, so always very exciting. The volunteer coordinator position that we have now within our legislative coordinator, hopefully, I know that Deidre is working to get that programming up and running. So hearing from you all about the really thoughtful, how do we do follow-ups and how do we make sure people stay engaged, I think is really powerful. And I'm sure she's listening to the meeting and taking vigilant notes. She's been very on it with connecting to staff and working towards getting that program up and running. And I will say lastly, I'm sure that former Councilmember Carson would be very happy to hear about the East Redmond corridor being brought back, dusted off, looking at it again. I'm very happy about it. I love the mapping. I kind of saw that there was stuff we couldn't see, and I kind of wanted more. I wanted to dig in and look at what all of that information was. But I love it when we have this synergy of ideas that you all are talking about the same things that we're all passionate about. So I'm really excited to see the budget asks coming forward. Don't be afraid to ask, and support all of these things within the budget.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a follow-up to Council Vice President Forsyth's comment about the volunteerism and about the position that we funded in the last budget to help to support more staff capacity for that. Multiple of you brought up kind of wanting to see more of that, and I think one of the questions that's imposed to us from the staff that are working with us on managing that position are kind of what specifically would be the most high-impact activities, and we do have now Deidre Marr in that in that position, and I think is looking to kind of build that out. So would love to hear from you all if some specifics on what you would see as kind of the most high impact use of staff time to be able to support volunteerism in our city. Like, where are some gaps where you see?
Thanks. Appreciate the question. An example was when we were planting trees in Heron Park. A couple friends I meet for coffee on a regular basis, I told them about it. They signed up. It was a little awkward at that time signing up, but they were really excited about the whole event, how well organized it was from staff standpoint. You know, all the equipment was there, the materials there, so their labor was well utilized. Where they found a gap is they wanted to find out, where was it? They understood that, you know, there were a couple plants that didn't get it in the ground, that staff was going to follow up on that, and then there was going to be another activity of watering them. And so they've asked me, probably within the last month, just, you know, how's it going there? So that kind of follow-up, you know, helps, you know, reinforce that appreciation and lets them know, you know, that was, you know, something I like doing and I'd like to do it again, maybe at that park or somewhere else. So I think that follow-up might be an area that could be emphasized more. My understanding of logistics of signing up have improved, and you know, the notification. So how best to kind of corral the interest, the opportunities, get that out there, and then just kind of reinforce that. You know, it's not what we're trying to press them into another commitment, but at least, you know, reinforce that. You know, we as a community benefit from their efforts. You know, and I think that's the kind of thing we want to kind of reinforce across the community. So, my idea.
Commissioner Smith?
Along the same line, I think Green Redmond's a vehicle for the same sort of support. And it's had a fall off inevitably because Forterra is no longer supporting the program. And I know it's a burden on the staff to have to do that sort of organizational work. I haven't cleared this with Dave Tuchek yet, but it seems to me, compared to an annual Trails Day, the work that goes on in Green Redmond is got a lot more spread throughout the community, and I'm sure the volunteer hours are much bigger, but it's going to need some more volunteer coordination, and I think it's a bit of a burden on the maintenance staff to have to provide that. It certainly would be the kind of thing that the volunteer coordinator should do.
Oh, one more comment. Yeah, Commissioner Kleppe?
Well, I think the big opportunity is we could hold many more events. We could do a lot more things if we had somebody who was making connections with people who wanted to volunteer, finding the times, coordinating with city staff to get those happening, and maybe some of these parks that are undeveloped in East Redmond corridor could get more activity to knock down some of the blackberries and take care of some other things. Anyhow, I think we could have a lot more events in a year if we had an infrastructure to coordinate and schedule all these things.
Thank you so much for those ideas. Appreciate them. Councilmember Nueva Camina.
Thank you. Apparently, I'm still having some difficulties with my mic, so I'll just hold it again. One, thank you to the Commission for not backing down from something that's hard. I know that former Councilmember David Carson was very passionate about then what was referred to as a string of pearls, that now collectively working into this green circle around Redmond that Council President Kritzer is very excited about. And one of the things that I'm most proud about with Redmond is that one, we're not afraid to take on something that is difficult, and that we've got some pretty brilliant minds around the table to figure out how we can get it done in an efficient way that brings an immense amount of value. I love the idea of more of us being connected with each other throughout the communities, and we're seeing this with our rails, with our trail systems, whether it be light rail connecting all of us or our various trails. This is going to be just another way that we can connect. I've talked to several residents where they never realized just how close Jewel Park was to other parks, and it was like, it's right there, but there's no access. So very excited about even the smallest wins that we've got to continue connecting with each other. Thank you.
Councilmember Fields?
I think we're going to have to rename this meeting the Dave Carson honoring meeting. because when I joined the council in 2017, that was something that he and I were perfectly aligned on. And we talked about it every opportunity we could get, certainly every budget season. And since Gary brought up our age, I'm going to use my authority to say, as an older person, life is short. And what I mean by that is there is a sense of urgency to get the right things done. And as our city grows and I drive around and I see a ton of buildings, I know that those buildings are going to be full of people very soon. And we need that infrastructure, including our parks, to maintain that quality of life. So I certainly would support immediately the partnerships and the funding to get this work done, because I think this is, in fact, a high priority. So I appreciate you bringing it up. Thank you.
Other comments, questions? Commissioner Smith?
Maybe I could call on Cameron to throw up that one slide. It was mentioned that there is this conservation futures idea, and we can talk about that later. But I did want to put a picture that would give you the visual to see exactly what we're talking about. I don't know if it's going to show up. That would be Caroline's map. Caroline, before she left, had put together a map that was on the conventional north-south arrangement that showed the corridor and highlighted what's called the spine trail that runs as the main trail north to south. That has a couple gaps that we talked about, and there is private property that is potential target for a grant, and that's called the Reed property that you see there right in the middle between Conrad Olson and Novelty Hill Road. There's literally no way to bridge that gap without that private parcel. This county has already obtained a parcel to the east of it, which is coming off the roundabout on Novelty Hill Road. And they have the potential to add to that. That would be my first hope. I won't get into Nichols Trail. If anybody knows the history there, and then John Couch has the whole story about how that came into being as a trail that could connect from Jewel Park south through from Farrell McWhirter, if it were in city hands.
Thank you. Thanks for bringing that up. I think one other thing I would mention that I think is interesting along this corridor is also our Evans Creek relocation project that will run along where that Bear and Evans Creek trail goes by. So just another kind of aspect of something that'll be such a amazing place also for environmental learning as that goes through. I guess one comment on this, you mentioned that there won't likely be asks during this budget cycle, but I guess to the point of, if we want to be moving towards eventually connecting, as we do identify any opportunities to be able to do those trail connections, big or small, would love to be able to see those. Maybe Director Hamilton can share a little of when we'll see those.
Yeah, happy to share. So one of the things that the subcommittee is working on with staff is an implementation plan. So like Gary shared this, like if I brought the master plan, it's literally like this. It's very big. It's a very large master plan that has, as Gary said, is extremely intricate. Yes, thank you, Gary. It's a pretty big master plan, very intricate, lots of pieces to it. And I think that one of the reasons this master plan has not been implemented more effectively in the past is because it's just a behemoth. I think when it was adopted, it promptly got set on a shelf because it's like, where do you start? So the first step right now that staff is working on with the commission is an implementation plan. So we are working on getting a consultant on board who's going to kind of help us break apart the master plan and understand from an implementation perspective what is kind of some low, medium, high priorities, and also what's low-hanging fruit, what can be done through volunteerism or through kind of, existing operational dollars and processes, and what will need large, like maybe medium term CIP asks, and what will be kind of those really big asks. Because with the intricacy of this trail, it would just, to do it all in one fell swoop would be a massive CIP project. And so, as we all know, we're looking at the MOC as the next major capital priority. And so, but we want to move forward on this. And so we're bringing that consultant on, and they're going to be working with the subcommittee and with staff to understand what that path will look like forward, so that we can get, so we can get that moving. And then we are also working with finance on working into the CIP process the actual design, because while this is master planned, as we established when we talked through the Southeast Redmond Neighborhood Park, a master plan is not the design. And so we are working with finance to and with the Public Works CIP team on when we can work to get the actual design of that through. We want to be mindful that we are not designing, like fully designing, until we know we have the CIP that's going to back it up to build. So there could be smaller asks through in next biennium that we would work with finance after this implementation plan is done. At this moment in time, there's not significant asks to make because we haven't done that implementation plan. But we are very committed to doing the implementation plan and then doing work on the implementation plan directly after that.
And when do you project that implementation plan will be
complete? Like Q1 next year? Probably Q1 2025.
Great. Well, I'll also say thanks to the commissioners who are serving on that subcommittee, and perhaps when that plan's complete, we could have some of the commissioners join for the conversation when that gets presented to the council.
Yeah, absolutely. We can come to a committee of the whole. And the other piece I just would be remiss to share, if I didn't share, is we have been still down our park planning manager position. And so we do have a new park planning program manager joining us July 1st. So Cameron and the park planning team and this commission will have kind of that full staff support back. And so we have been operating kind of a little bit short on that. So we are really working hard to get this moving forward.
Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you, and congratulations on your new hire, Director Hamilton. And for the commissioners, thank you all so much for your work. There was this other milestone that occurred since we last met with the commission and today, which was the adoption of the park plan. And we would be remiss not to mention that today, just to thank you all so much for your work. I pulled it up here quickly, and it's interesting because the implementation of the East Redmond corridor is the first thing listed in the 25 to 30 timeframe, and the last thing on the list is the development of the Southeast Redmond neighborhood park. So we've really bookended the conversation here today, but wanted to thank you all. And I think as a community, we have been spending the last several years doing a lot of ideation about what the future we want for our community is. That included the park plan, that includes all the conversations with Redmond 2050, and so much more. And it's a budget year, so we're kicking that off too in the shorter time frame. I was curious, now that the park plan is complete, how that is guiding the work of the commission. You're not building a park plan this year, but you're working to implement it throughout the city. And if there's anything that comes to mind regarding the park plan that we should know about coming into the new year.
Well, for the park plan, it's kind of our guiding light, within this particular commission. And I think that's how the ERC subcommittee probably got started. We see it at the top of the list. It's exciting. It's an ambitious project. Of course, it needs updating because, it's aging a bit. But that's probably what got things started. And we use that as, our fundamental kind of like, North Star when we're looking at projects to take on. So I would say that played a big part in this. We probably should have stated that.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Did I see a hand over here before? Oh, Councilmember Fields.
Yeah, I just remembered one of the things that caught my attention was, I don't remember who, somebody from over there had mentioned a consultant for wayfinding. And I'm in huge support of that. I think getting wayfinding right, especially because we're in somewhat of a deficit here in the city of Redmond, and it's changing quickly. And I think getting people who have that collective years of experience in doing that is really important. So I just wanted to provide my agreement, affirmation to that idea.
Councilmember Salahuddin.
Yep, thank you. I think a few folks have mentioned specifically, talking about Southeast Redmond Park and then looking at the corridor. And I know it was, briefly circled in one of the slides when there was that connector. Is that in the plan that we see in front of you, Commissioner Smith? The connection between Southeast Redmond Park and the first portion of...
No, it was not in the plan at the time, but I think everyone's agreed it should be added.
Yeah, I don't, it was not part of the original master plan, but it has been identified both by the subcommittee and staff and in conversations between us all that we would be remiss to not identify it in the implementation plan. If we were to look at connecting it, we may need to amend the master plan there's a couple other parcels that would require us to kind of amend the master plan. The bulk of the master plan is good, so it would just be adding those couple of things, but it's for sure going to be identified in the implementation plan because that's really going to serve as our guiding light as we move forward through that very large plan sitting in front of Gary. So not in the original one, but identified as a need.
Perfect. Yeah, I would highly advocate for that because it's connecting an entire community just to this corridor. Yeah.
Commissioner Smith?
I totally agree with that kind of enthusiasm. We see this, I think, going south from the terminus of the Barron Evans Creek Trail now as a good example of near, medium, and long term. There's a 50-foot gap between Martin Park and Arthur Johnson Park. That can be done under the current master plan, this document. It shows a crossing under Union Hill Road. You can literally walk it now, but there's no soft surface trail even. That, I think, can be done within a year. Then the next step is how to get through Arthur Johnson Park. That's going to take a bridge. So that's maybe medium term, a seven-figure number probably. And then there's the finale of getting it all the way to Southeast Redmond, which is a far distant plan.
Council Vice President Forsyth.
Thank you. Just circling back on the wayfinding conversation, I wanted to make sure I mentioned that that's a big topic that I serve on the East Trail Regional Committee Council, or Regional Committee, and that is a big conversation that we're having for that entire East Trail corridor. So you may likely see wayfinding happening along the East Trail in Redmond alongside our conversations for wayfinding, and it would be great that if potentially at some point we can marry up those conversations and get the same kind of visual language. As a former wayfinding professional myself, I want to make sure that we're having consistent language and making sure that we're using these similar symbols, making sure that it's all accessible and giving us the best bang for our buck.
Thank you. I think we're coming up on our time here, so I will put it out there in case any of the commissioners have any final comments you wanted to share before we wrap up. All right, seeing none, I would be remiss if I didn't get to say thank you, especially to the Parks and Trails and Recreation Commission for all of your work on the Redmond Senior and Community Center. It's so exciting, as Commissioner Whalen said, to be able to open that this last month. But I know kind of all of my time on council has been working on that, leading up to that. But really seeing commissioners, both present and past, working on that project and on all the planning that went into even thinking about our community centers and what we want. So I just wanted to, while we're all together, be able to celebrate this huge achievement of this amazing center that we have out here, and look forward to hearing from you all about your feedback you're hearing from the community about use of that center as it's getting activated, ways we can continue to make it even more vibrant. With that, I think we'll just say thank you so much to all of you for your ongoing service, for all of these priorities you've elevated, and we'll definitely be keeping them in mind as we're working on the budget, and feel free to be communicating with us as we move forward on that process this year as well as 2050. Thank you. I think we'll take a 5-minute recess just between items. We'll come back at 7:52.
Whoever's got this up.
Thank you. Welcome back to the Redmond City Council study session on June 11th, 2024. The next item on our agenda is Redmond 2050 Planning Commission Recommendation on Residential Regulations. Carol Helland, Director of Planning and Community Development, will introduce this item. Go ahead, Director Helland.
Thank you so much. Good evening, Council President Kritzer and Mayor, council members. At your regular business meeting last week, we did introduce the Planning Commission recommendation on the residential regulations. We did a PowerPoint that is attached to your materials from last week. And at that meeting, you did identify topics that you wanted to spend further time discussing. So staff did prepare in the materials that are attached to your packet this evening in attachment A, responses to those questions and additional information if that's a good starting point for you to have a conversation. And tonight that staff is seeking council direction on any changes or questions you have about the materials so that we can prepare them for council adoption in the fall. We do have time reserved on June 25th if your discussion is not concluded this evening, but if we wrap up, you will get that time back for other important topics that are on your schedule. And tonight I am joined by Ian Lefcourt, Audra Cardenas, and Jeff Churchill and we're all here to answer any questions you may have.
Great, thank you so much. There are quite a few questions that were raised last time. There were some that multiple council members asked, so I thought just to get our discussion started, I might highlight a few of these and ask the staff to give a summary for the listening public of some of the information that was contained within our materials, as well as some of the kind of highlights of things to think about. I think the first one that there were multiple questions on was around lot splitting and how you thought about lot splitting in the context of these regulations, if you could speak to that. And then I'll open it up to the council members who had questions on that if you had needed follow-up for your specific questions you asked.
Thank you. So lot splitting at a high level is exactly what it sounds like. You have a piece of land and you chop it up. Recent proposed state legislature, House Bill 1245 included a lot of provisions that would preempt local jurisdictions and kind of put on a requirement for this. One of the big challenges, possible issues that is raised with lot splitting is that if you want to split a lot to something smaller than the actual standards of the zone, you could. What does that mean? It means that you could create a lot which you could then sell to someone who may not be aware that you can't actually develop it to the full or even some capacity of the underlying zone. So that's one possible pitfall. Why we went forward with our current regulations that helps address some of the underlying values that were a part of that state legislation, ultimately it's about getting smaller lots to help create more housing, right? Our residential regulations, we hope, do this in a few ways. The first is, of course, just allowing more dwelling units per lot. The second is by streamlining the process upon which we can helpfully create those ownership opportunities through unit lot subdivision or zero lot line in the case of like duplexes. So the zoning code has some tools in our toolbox, which kind of already gets at what the intent of the bill was. So that's a high-level discussion of that council topic.
And I just wanted to add on to that, Ian, everything that Ian said is exactly right. The mechanics of the bill, and I understand exactly what the legislature and some of the proponents were trying to accomplish, is they wanted to be able to have control of what they call the dirt immediately so they could construct and start the process. In many cases, it was about trying to allow a resident that is in the home on that larger parcel to stay there while they construct on the smaller parcel. There were a number of things that we thought were fatal flaws in the bill because they did kind of an in-run around the enforcement, the plan review checks that we use to ensure driveway locations, appropriate utilities, and other infrastructure that can be supplied to that lot. And so it was kind of a alternative to refining the plating requirements, the state law plating requirements. So instead of addressing the problem, they created a new solution. And it probably would be a better solution to actually try to address some of the tools that are already available in the state law for lot segregation, and really the speed that Ian was talking about in permit streamlining to address some of the concerns so that we do continue to maintain the infrastructure needs for those lots and don't create innocent purchasers for value that actually can't develop a lot as they understood that they could.
Are there follow-up questions from council members who had asked about this topic? And Council Vice President Forsyth.
Thank you for the follow-up information and the very clear explanation of why we're supporting what we're supporting and we're doing what we're doing and how what we're doing actually gets at the end goal of what that bill truly was trying to accomplish. I'm just interested in how we are going to be communicating out that our regulations have that flexibility and how we'll be working towards that middle housing goal.
Sure, I can speak to that. The mayor and I actually meet with the master builders together with Director Burt and with Chief Shepard on a every other month basis, and we keep them up to speed on the requirements and the code changes that are being made. We actually have sat down with the master builders during this interim legislative session to try and hammer out some solutions that actually they see still some opportunity for us to improve streamlining and things like that. So I think we're being very proactive with their organization, and they amplify those messages to their organization. When we had a recent housing week, the Affordable Housing Week that occurred a couple of weeks ago, Master Builders actually did host a panel that many city officials were at, and Redmond actually got a call out for doing all of the right things that they were hoping to see. So we get used more often as an example, and then some of the communities that actually they feel aren't being as proactive about using the tools that are available to them.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, because while we're doing this work, the bill was really meant to go for the folks that aren't necessarily doing this work. Aside from master builders, is there any way that we're communicating out? Like, I just had a community member last week approach me and say, did you know we could do a detached unit on our home? And I'm like, yes, I did. And so I got to explain to them a little more about what that meant. And but I know there are residents that still don't know that that's a possibility. Is there anything, are we maybe going to highlight something in a focus, or any other ways that we can get that message out?
I think you'll see that our communications at Redmond 2050, as we progress through 2024, are going to turn to implementation and education. And so just last week we were brainstorming about what's the message we want to communicate at Derby Days, for example, where a lot of people from the community are going to be able to come and see us, and it is going to be about education about what's changing, what new opportunities are available. And so I think we'll use all the tools at our disposal to orient toward implementation education.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that, especially the aspect of folks aging in place. We know, like through the AARP data, that is such a meaningful moment when someone can age with caregivers right on their same property. So appreciate that.
And as part of our regulatory updates, we are updating submittal information, information just about permitting and the kinds of things you can do. So already you can find a tremendous amount of information about housing opportunities and variety of housing that you're able to accomplish on lots throughout the city. The changes that are recommended by the Planning Commission's recommendation that was before you last week and we're discussing this evening actually does further simplify, because as you know, in the neighborhood areas, we are consolidating so many zones. So the tools are going to be available across a broader swath of the city.
Thank you.
And to follow up on this conversation, just so we can kind of bring together some of the other questions, there was another question, I think, from Councilmember Stewart around, how are we making strides not only on allowing missing middle, but also making it easier and more attractive to build. And I don't know if whether you want to comment on that, whether there's additional kind of pieces within our planning that you would want to note of kind of that set of tools, or Councilmember Stewart, whether you had any follow-up on what the information provided on that question. I just thought it kind of looped in with that one.
Thank you. I appreciate the full context of kind of the many questions that came together. So I don't have any immediate follow-up question. I think that the matrix addressed my questions in this area. And I see Redmond using every available tool to convert this housing as best we can. And on the earlier conversation, I just wanted to say, you know, this is a story, because this was a question we got from the public, so I want to report back to the public, you know, on the lot splitting question that we asked on your behalf. This is just another one of those examples where oftentimes Redmond is doing something really well, and when our staff in particular are working so hard during the legislative session, we're not only working to continue to establish the intent and get the outcome at the end of the day for the housing, in this case middle housing, but we're also our staff are working so hard to preserve the good things, the tools that we already are using, and I just really appreciate that about the city of Redmond. Thank you.
Councilmember Nova Camina.
Thank you. Director Helen, thank you for this, and also for the staff for the work that you put on this, and just being a stand for utilizing all the tools that we have. I don't know if we've been able to forecast this far out, or have even been thinking about it quite yet, and also understanding it's quite nebulous. We do know that we're about 50% renters, and we're looking for home ownership opportunities. While we're putting in buildings at 100 units plus, have we been able to take a look at, if we're able to implement this, what could we expect as far as increasing homeownership opportunities? Have we even begun to be able to quantify that?
Our growth modeling scenarios that we went through with council assumed about a 20% implementation rate of middle housing. Now, that is across all of the plausible lots that were identified as underdeveloped, so ones that would have some amount of pressure to repurpose that property into something more intense. That is useful for the growth modeling. Other jurisdictions are between 5, 7, and 12, and there's a lot of unknowns to this question. So for one, the middle housing will not override any HOA CC&Rs. So that's still an area of the city that we're trying to fully capture and get a more up-to-date database on. And there's also a question of, well, even if we do get these units fully operational, off the ground, developed within 2 years of everything going live, it does raise the question of, well, we know that the majority of these units will be for sale, but does that mean that each one is going to a distinct household, or will they be purchased and then subsequently rented out? We do know that this is a lot of text for saying I do not have a good model number for you, but we do know that it will increase the opportunity for it.
Right. I'm glad that Ian mentioned covenants, because it's not a portion of the city we have a really good understanding of. It's one of those areas where we do need to do some additional research to figure out exactly how many dwelling units in the city are governed by covenants and homeowners associations that would prevent the addition of additional structures. So there can't be any new covenants attached that eliminate the ability to do middle housing, because that was incorporated into the state law. So moving forward, new homeowners and associations can't be formed to exclude that variety of housing. But retroactively, we can't necessarily fix it unless homeowners associations decide by generally 100% of their members to change the homeowners association covenants, which is a very difficult measure to obviously pass if you're going to delete a section. What some builders are finding is that if you don't enforce your covenants over time, you actually lose their enforceability. So we have been talking to some of the master builders who actually go into neighborhoods and that they know have covenants in them, and look for indications that covenants have not been maintained over time. Oftentimes it's kind of maintenance and landscaping standards that might be a clue, or the parking of RVs, trailers, and boats and things like that, which are oftentimes excluded from covenants or from homeowners association properties. And that can be an indication to them that those covenants haven't been maintained over time, they're no longer enforceable, and they may have an opportunity to essentially build in those areas because the covenants have basically lapsed for inactivity. The other thing that Ian noted was the kind of, we can't guarantee who rent or whether the house is available for rent or for homeownership, because some of it is the rental actually provides the opportunity, for instance, for maybe a person to age in place and rent that to subsidize their home. So it won't necessarily create new homeownership opportunities, but it provides another home for people to live in. The other thing that we can do is look a little bit more stringently at our short-term rental regulations, because short-term rentals don't offer the same stability in housing type. And if you provide a lot of flexibility for people to rent their homes, that becomes a very attractive solution. So if we kind of limit some of that flexibility, they may be more inclined to sell, for instance, backyard homes or dadus or other forms of middle housing that they develop. And then just lastly, we are doing things, I know we're meeting shortly, staff is meeting shortly with Habitat for Humanity. They have a very specific model, and they need land donations in order to be successful, but that could be an opportunity for us to make some progress on the homeownership front if, when we do our catalog of city-owned properties, and see if any of those are suitable for Habitat for Humanity units.
Councilmember Salahuddin.
Yep, thank you so much. And I just want to say I really appreciate all of the comprehensive answers to in the matrix. I think I don't have any questions. I know that we all recognize the work that you've put in, and understanding that we just need more housing, and getting there is challenging on all fronts. So I appreciate everything that you've put in here. My one, not a question, but a comment specific to Councilmember Stewart's question on adult family homes and that accommodation. I do appreciate you adding, at council's direction, the staff, modifying or amending to include an exemption to the maximum square footage. I think especially when, there's 5 homes that were listed, but 60% of those being greater than 4,900 square feet, and understanding just the space that might be needed for adult family homes in specific situations, others maybe not, but having that flexibility, I appreciate you adding that in, and would like to consider that more, so thank you.
Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you, Councilmember Salahuddin. I really appreciate that. And thank you for the staff for the suggestion. Following our conversation last week, I did speak with the folks at Community Homes which is someone that we have funded through our human services, an organization rather, that we have funded through our human services budget, and who operates many of these homes. This is a housing type I would like to see us be able to allow. Obviously, most adult family homes are conversions from existing homes, but I never want to leave the opportunity for an organization to receive some wonderful philanthropy and then have their dream home built for their residents here in Redmond. So I would love to not leave that off the table and make sure that we're able to do that. So thank you, Councilmember Salahuddin, for your support on that.
Thank you, and thanks for raising that. We can jump to that item within the matrix here. I guess I'll ask council, because what staff noted in the matrix here was that if council gave the direction that staff could revise the amendments to include that exemption to maximum square footage limits for adult family homes. So I want to get a temperature check from folks on if they're supportive of adding that. Council Vice President Forsyth.
Real quick, hopping back, I'm excited about the potential to talk about short-term rental regulations, if that's a topic that we can talk about soon within this context. And the habitat conversation, I think, is really an exciting opportunity too. On the staff recommendation of a 4,500 square foot max to the 4,900 square foot planning commission jump, I would be leaning towards the staff recommendation, and then having that potential for an exemption for an adult family home. I'm concerned about us going towards a 4,900 square foot single family home just without any other caveats with it, because of the the housing price in general right now with interest rates, I think that's going to be a really, really attractive option for builders, but that's not getting to us towards our goal of middle housing, of making sure more people are going to be able to attain housing. I have a lot of concerns. I spent a lot of time this weekend looking at Zillow, looking at Redfin, and the average price of a home in this area is well over $1 million. And if we are allowing 4,900 square foot single family homes just for a one family situation, we're going to start going down that path of McMansions again that we saw from the early 2000s. And I just have a lot of concerns about that. So I'm all for the exemption for a single family or for a adult family home, but keeping that 4,500 square foot cap that staff initially recommended.
And, since there was so much council interest on this topic, I'm wondering if our staffs, and there's a lot of good detail in here, just for the listening public, if you can summarize some of the discussion that you provided to us of what we might be considering, and also what the Planning Commission considered in thinking about this topic, as well as a summary for us in terms of the feedback that you would need to be able to add any amendments here.
Yeah, I would like to speak to the second component first, the Planning Commission discussion, and then I will transfer to Audra to go through the data specifically about the family size. There are many kind of subcomponents of this discussion related to the gross floor area of a detached single-family home. Whether or not a garage is going to be included, what about unfinished basements, what other pieces would be included? Do we want to have the exact same definition we use in our RZC for gross floor area, or do we want to have slight exemptions and tweaks? And the Planning Commission discussed all of this. They had a lot of good perspectives, intergenerational living, making sure that additions and revisions weren't exempted. But ultimately, I would say many of the planning commissioners had different triangulation points such that the consensus of 4,900 that came to you, it took a lot of actual kind of triaged voting to get to that point, just because there were so many different considerations that each of the commissioners had in a different viewpoint. So 4,900 is ultimately I won't say consensus, but it was, the majority-minority vote that came out to move forward with a recommendation. So keep that in mind, that there's a lot of different values that we're all trying to get reflected here. And so we can touch on several of those pieces as we move forward, but for the actual numbers themselves, I'll let Audra discuss it.
To keep it pressed. Okay. Yes, so we, the 4,500 square footage maximum was based on data extraction that we did on the assessor's data for King County. The data was extracted on March 1st. And here in your packet, you can see we built this histogram, and we were basing our 4,500 on trying to regulate those 1.4% of housing units that are bigger than 4,500, which 4,500 is already a very big number because the average square footage for single-family homes is 2,300, so it's almost double. So we are trying just to regulate a little bit there, but this is also on top of all the other regulations. This is like an extra. It's not that if you only take this into account, you don't take care of like setbacks and total lot coverage and impervious surface. So they all have to work together, right? So this is just one of the points that we picked in to try to incentivize you get more square footage, the more dwelling units you build, right? So that was like our logic on that number. And then as Ian was mentioning, the 49 just came during the discussion, and our planning commission just decided on that. But that puts the number into I think it's 0.8, which is very little. It's very, very small that we are regulating. So it's basically the end tail of the chart that you can see there, the histogram. Anything else, Ian, on this?
Can you clarify, in the comments, it talks about a potential exemption that Mayor Burney identified. Can you speak to that as well?
Thank you. I just wanted to find it in the text. So the exemption that Mayor Bernie identified is for unfinished floor area within an envelope. So if you've got a home, you've got an unfinished basement, and your home is relatively large, or you have some unfinished space, but it's within the envelope of the existing building, that be allowed to be finished, even if it would exceed the limit, whether that be 45 or 49 or kind of wherever the council lands.
And is that included in the current regulations, or would that be an ask to the council
It would be an ask to the council.
to add that in addition? So can you, in terms of areas where you would need council direction in this piece, can you summarize, so that way we can kind of get a sense from everyone if we're good with making some of those decisions?
Sure. So I think there's 3 in the matrix. One is exemption for adult family homes from the gross floor area limit. The second is the gross floor area limit itself, 49, 4,500, or somewhere else. And then the third is exempting area that's within the existing envelope of a home.
Councilmember Salahuddin?
Yeah, really quickly on that, that final point, I see here it says that the assessor's data indicates no unfinished basements, but is there data on garages? I think the potential garage conversions.
We did not look at garages, but at that point, I was going to raise it too, that it's on the 4,900 square feet, that there are no unfinished basements. I mean, I just wanted to clarify that. But we haven't done the analysis on the garages. We could, if the council wants it, we can do that too.
Councilmember Stewart?
I have a couple questions on the nuances of this, especially this exemption, but I'm going to set those aside for a second because I want to get back to the purpose of the maximum structure recommendation at all, and relate it, what's missing from this piece. And of course, now I just have the matrix in front of me, not the whole packet, but what's missing maybe from this is the relationship of the structures to the size of the lots, because we've just been discussing lot splitting, or excuse me, subdivision, and how that could create more middle housing in our city. So could you bring us back to that level of the purpose of this maximum recommendation and how it would impact most lots that currently exist in Redmond, in our residential zones?
The intent is to incentivize middle housing, quite bluntly. It incentivizes moving towards a greater quantity of fewer units where potentially the return on investment would exceed that of just that single family home, thus moving development towards more housing units. In terms of the impact the 4,900 square foot limit would have on existing homes, 0.8% of the detached single-family homes would be legally non-conforming, and that could impede things like addition permit requests and so forth.
And so given that, thank you, and so given that purpose, and I don't want to minimize the small percentage of homes, that we would be speaking of, especially between the 45 and the 49, given that it sounds like there was a lot of discussion at Planning Commission, so I don't want to minimize it. But why did the recommendation start at 4,500 and not 3,500 if it is to convert to more middle housing?
That piece was a component looking at the recent development trends. If we look at the eras of construction in the city of Redmond, there are 2 big eras in recent history. One has, as touched on earlier, a much greater presence of larger homes. Before that, it was noticeably less, and that's over, 11 years or so? And this initial discussion came about because we do have a through line of Redmond 2050 of trying to avoid legally non-conforming where possible, while also balancing the fact that some amount, if we moved forward with this general framework, would in fact become legally nonconforming. Combined to that with the notion of picking a tail end amount of the distribution to minimize that impact, we thought that might be an appropriate place to start the conversation, 4,500.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions on this from the council? Thoughts on the potential changes, exemptions?
And I do think on this one, it would be useful for us to hear council direction on those three elements that Jeff listed, the gross square footage, the gross floor area, and the exemption for ADUs and the exemption for space internal to the existing envelope.
Great.
Adult family homes, though, not ADUs, just for clarity.
Adult family homes.
So I guess the first would be on the square footage. Are council members, I guess, show of thumbs, okay with the Planning Commission's recommendation of 4,900? Councilmember Stewart?
I still have unanswered questions, so I'm not ready to provide that input. I have some remaining questions, especially about the suggestion by Mayor Bernie.
You have a question about it?
I have remaining questions. I don't know if everyone is ready to take that.
Yeah, perhaps not. Yes, I didn't see other questions. That's why I moved to that. But would you like to ask the question about Mayor Bernie's suggestion?
Sure, thanks. Quite frankly, I'm just not sure I followed it. And I want to make sure that I understand it, and I apologize if I'm the only council member who didn't get to that. But when we talk about that existing space within the envelope, does that mean you can build a home up to that limit, whatever we decide, and plus there's an additional area unfinished and you can finish that later, which then is going to put your total home space above that? How does this work? I'm sorry.
So we're talking, well, I see the mayor has her hand raised. So maybe.
Mayor Bernie?
Yeah, can you hear me? Okay.
We can, yes.
Okay, great. So my question for the staff was, let's say you, I know people who have built houses with a unfinished daylight basement, and it was built when the house was built some years ago. And they bought the house thinking that at some point they might complete the square footage in the basement. So I wouldn't want to preclude anyone from having some sort of unfinished basement in their house, not being able to finish that based on this information. And so that's where my question was, asking the staff to make a exception to that. I didn't even think about the finishing garage space either. Thanks, Councilmember Salahuddin, for bringing that up. But it's more of like they've invested in a house that already has this opportunity, and I don't want us to do anything that would preclude it.
And I think if I understood the mayor's suggestion, we're talking about homes that already exist. So it's not like a builder could build a home that had 4,900 square feet of living space and another 1,500 square feet of unfinished space after these regulations go into effect. We're talking about homes that are already out there that have a total space greater than the gross floor area limit, and maybe some of it's unfinished, like a garage or a basement.
Which we can make sure we stipulate in the regulations that say homes in existence as of the effective date of this ordinance, as of January 1, 2025, get access to this exemption.
Thank you for the clarification. Do you have any follow-up questions on that, Councilmember Stewart?
I'm not sure yet. I'm wondering too about the possibility that maybe someone has that unfinished basement and they turn it into an apartment, and then they've created another living opportunity of some kind, or invite more folks from their family to have a multi-generational home. So anyway, thank you. I understand the concept better now.
Yeah, and I guess speaking to some of the pros that were discussed on the Planning Commission around having a larger square footage within a house.
I can just note that it wouldn't preclude what you're suggesting, that they could do an accessory dwelling unit within the envelope of the home. So it wouldn't preclude that.
Thank you for that clarification. Given that when I asked for a show of thumbs, it looked like everyone was a little hesitant, I'm wondering, council members, do we want a little time to think on these three options, and we can always come back for the study session, or would folks like to weigh in at this moment to give direction? Councilmember Nueva Camina.
Thank you. I'd like to wait for a little bit and get some more information. Having a better understanding of where the commission was coming up, like it sounds like that there was some pretty important points as to how they came up with the 49, and I would doubt very highly that, you know, if we're talking about 500 square feet, 400 square feet, that there's got to be a reason. I would just want some time to learn more about their reasoning behind it.
Sure. Thank you. Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you, and I appreciate Councilmember Nueva Camina's comment. I personally have no concept of how large this home is, so I'm having a hard time kind of conceptualizing the difference between like 400 square feet in this case. So it would be really helpful to hear some of that explanation, and just given that an apartment here in Redmond is somewhere around 1,000 square feet or less, just for purposes of understanding and relating to most of the folks that live here, I think it would be really helpful for our conversation. So thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Bernie? Did you intend to put your hand up, Mayor Bernie?
No, I forgot to lower it. Sorry.
Oh, all right. Councilmember Salahuddin.
Yeah, just echoing that on the specific point of the 4,900 square feet. I think for the other two, I'm good with the exemptions for the other two items.
Great. Council Vice President Forsyth.
I'm in the same boat. I'm good with the other two exemptions. I'm probably going to want to maybe have an offline conversation about the 4,900 versus 4,500 topic and learn a bit more.
Great, and I will weigh in. I'm good with the exemptions as well. It sounds like there needs to be some follow-up on before we give direction on that, on the 45 versus 4,900. Let's go through the rest of some of the items in here, and then depending on how many pending items we have, we can figure out how we follow up on this. Moving through, I think we skipped over a few things, but I think some people noted that their questions had been answered. I did want to just touch on, there were a couple questions about timing. Did the council members who asked about timing for completing inclusionary zoning, as well as these regulations generally, feel that your questions were answered? We can close those out. Great. Seeing that looks good. And I think there was a question about neighborhood zoning from Councilmember Stewart. Are you good to close that question out as well? And then I think there was a question about the impacts of covering land with structures, stormwater, and other environmental impacts from Councilmember Fields. Were you good with that, as well as the question about regulations on levels of service for transportation? The answers on that as well?
I'd have to watch the video to see what I actually said, but I don't think that was my question. I think the question was, are you able to do an analysis of the collective changes that we're proposing to existing neighborhoods, older neighborhoods, as we call them? And I think the answer is no, that you can't do the analysis. I mean, you quoted or you cited that you're within legal restrictions, existing restrictions, but that doesn't really answer the question, what would be the impact? So I'm just going to take it that you can't do it and deal with it.
Do you have a comment, Mr. Churchill?
I think what we were trying to convey is that the analysis for impacts to stormwater, utilities, transportation, parks, and other things like that were completed as part of the environmental impact statement. They are not site-specific or even kind of subdivision-specific, and so they can't pin down to that degree of precision, like what's going to happen with that water in that area. But what it can give you is kind of orders of magnitude of impacts that can be expected from this kind of development going forward. Generally the impervious surface area maximums and lot coverages are a little bit higher than in some of the zones, but also the stormwater management regulations that are in place today are more stringent than they were when most of those homes were built. And so it's not at all clear that because the lot coverage maximum will increase, that there would be a direct relationship between that and impacts to runoff, because the mitigation measures are so much more stringent than they were when where this is most likely to happen is in places where homes are older, where maybe they're built in the 60s and 70s when our runoff regulations were much different than they are today. So I think there's a level of precision that we can't provide to you, but I do think that the EIS covered that topic.
Yeah, so the intent of my question was, in fact, the broader, the higher level. I'm certainly not looking for any specific properties or even a specific area. The question I was asking is, you have to remember, you're a lot smarter than me on all this stuff. I'm just a dumb council member. What I want to know is, are we creating a problem, an environmental problem, with something that is a risk for an area like ours with a lot of hills and a lot of potential rainfall? Are we creating a problem by solving a problem? Are we creating an environmental problem that we're not ready for by trying to create more housing and affordable housing? That's all I'm asking.
And I think that's a great question. I think the answer to that is no. I do think one issue that we have uncovered in kind of the implementation of middle housing is, most stormwater regulations apply at a subdivision level or when you're doing like a large commercial site. And we're going to have to figure out how to apply them for middle housing, because that's, even though, it's already allowed in Redmond, you can do this, but there are restrictions, and so we don't see a lot of it. Opening those opportunities up means finding the way that is going to get people through a permitting process and apply our responsibilities under our MPDS permit to get the outcomes that demands.
So I was just going to add to what Jeff said. He basically said, no, there isn't an issue. And if you go back to the EIS, the programmatic analysis of the issue, especially of middle housing, is that we did not identify any significant adverse environmental impacts. And as a result, that means the regulations that we have in place mitigate programmatically for the types of issues in the areas of earth, water, soils, seismic risk, all of the various different elements of the environment that you evaluate during an environmental impact statement. And we went through that whole process and did both the draft environmental impact statement, a supplemental draft, and then the final. And so an easy way to kind of look at the report card on where there were kind of more impacts or less impacts would be through the links to those EIS documents that include actually the colored kind of bar graphs that tell you where on the continuum the regulations kind of get a little bit more towards the red and where they're a little bit more towards the green, and how we basically evaluated a final draft, basically a final preferred alternative that optimized the things that were the most protective while achieving council objectives.
I hear you, and I think, again, I don't have a lot of experience. Let me just tell you where this question originated.
Mm-hmm.
When we did an addition 20 some odd years ago, mm-hmm. we added 600 square feet onto our house. Mm-hmm. We did all the inspections, and the one inspection that always stuck in my mind is we had a little cement thing out where the gutter came out.
The splash, yeah.
Splash.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy said, no, you can't do that. I said, what do you mean? It cost me $5. He He said, no, you have to dig a trench and a French drain and make sure that the water goes underground. So here we are 25 years later, I'm sitting on city council. That guy made a big deal out of that. So I have to think that the more we cover with cement, the more we cover with non-permeant structure, there has to be a collective problem for the city of Redmond. You're saying that you may not have done a new analysis, but the analyses that exist give you comfort that we're not creating a stormwater runoff nightmare.
Right. That's correct, with also what Jeff described as how the mitigations have been heightened since you added onto your home 20 years ago. And so since you've added onto your home 20 years ago, the Clean Water Act, which then kind of cascades down to the state, which cascades down to us to basically administer our national pollutant discharge and elimination system, actually describes the steps we need to take to ensure that we're compliant with that overall permit that is a statewide requirement. So basically, the things that have changed over time, we're satisfied that the analysis in the EIS tells us programmatically what will happen and that the mitigations are in place to ensure that those outcomes are met and achieved.
And that's the question, and that's a good answer for me, so I appreciate that. You know much more about this than me. I'm just simply asking the question. And the other question that I had was on levels of service. You know, but I'm less concerned about that problem because that no one can predict exactly what kind of technology holds us for the future as far as transportation anyway. So yeah, I guess to answer Council President's question, I'm good.
Great, thank you. Well, and I'm glad we could have this conversation. I know that I learned a lot from that. And on the point about recent analysis, the analysis, the EIS is fairly recent. So I think that's something that we can look at as we look at the environmental impacts of these decisions as well. Great. So I think the next actually item is an item that I had, which was around our solid waste storage and collection. I asked this question mostly, I just wanted to, if possible, have a highlight for the public. And you'll notice I have a few themes tonight around highlight for the public, since this is a dense document, and just want to make sure that people can follow along with some of the very cool things we're putting in here. I think this is one of these ones we hear a lot about, is about how do we make it more possible for multifamily developments to be able to increase the amount of use of composting. And right now, some of the barriers in some of our construction is that it's hard for the collection points to be accessed. So I'm curious if you can just share a little bit about what we'll see that's new when we implement these proposed regulations, especially within our neighborhood multifamily zone developments.
Yeah, I think the overall thrust, especially for the neighborhood multifamily zone, is that both the efficiency of the different wastes being collected on site and then the effectiveness of that off-site pickup that comes into it. One of the pieces of feedback we heard from some of our stakeholders is concerns about individual refuse containers being pushed out in creating barriers, whether that's on the sidewalk or near egresses. And so this kind of collected effort, which also increases the specifications about precisely how and where on-site it will be collected. We hope that two-pronged approach will generally make it easier for the site to be collected on site and then taken off site. Some of the benefits of this will be cheaper service, hopefully less obstructions. Those 5 a.m. trucks coming around, maybe they're in and out a little bit faster and you can get some more Z's, things like that. Those are some of the highlights.
And does this, would this now necessitate for new construction that they do create those collection points?
Yes. That will apply to the new NMF developments.
Great. Councilmember Stewart.
Yeah, thank you. I thought this was a great question and perhaps an opportunity to zero in on a question that we've asked a couple times before, and it's been difficult to discern. So here in the response, we have a table, and it says that buildings that have more than 30 units and 3 or more stories will be required to have a collection point on each floor that contains dwelling units. So my question is, in those required collection points, is waste stream separation required in that collection point?
I will have to double check the code.
Okay. I would really love us to follow up on this because I think that we've gotten a similar response twice, and I want to make sure we're going to be able to get this one. So thank you. I appreciate that. And just for the listening public, we have the table also has for different sized buildings, but the top threshold is that 3 stories or more, 30 or more units, then it's going to be on every floor. It's just the what, and making sure that we're getting compost separated from the garbage on that floor right there is going to keep the stream the cleanest as possible. Thanks.
Thank you for digging in on that question, Councilmember Stewart. I think I assumed reading it that was the intent, but I would love to be able to have the clarification that is actually how it would work in practice, since I think that's been at the heart of many of our discussions, is how to increase the separation of different types of waste, and in particular, increasing composting within our city. Other comments or questions on this topic? Okay. Then I will move on to one more, which also was one that I had come up with, but I think we had covered most of the other ones that are in this document. So, but I will at the end, in case I missed any ones that are still open, come back. The last one that I had asked about was around design guidelines, and I just want to raise this because I know I'm going to get some questions from folks who look at this and see all the design pieces X'd out, pages and pages of them. And just curious if you can give us a high-level discussion of why we're seeing some of these changes, and where the public, if they want to see where, really what the guardrails will be on making sure that there are design standards, and then also what are some of the things that we're not able to do anymore.
Absolutely. So the high level is many of the changes, the red lines that we see, are design standards which generally create neighborhood by neighborhood variance, but not necessarily lead to the actual kind of placemaking of that neighborhood. So for example, some neighborhoods have a specific provision from R4 zoning that the building separation, instead of the baseline R4 of 10 feet, has to be in these neighborhoods 15 feet. Now that's different. It's across multiple, but not all, neighborhoods for R4. Does an extra 5 feet of building separation come up that often in R4 zoning? Probably not. Does it create a unique sense of different neighborhoods? I would posit that probably isn't noticed by most folks. So it's removals of components like that. Now, what's staying? Many of the exact type of design requirements that exist now, but they're just streamlined. So some examples of things that are still staying. Facade material variation, facade modulation, roof pitches, window treatments. There's variation requirements for all of these, so you don't get the same cookie cutter over and over again. But it is really just kind of like those tightening up here and there, reducing neighborhood by neighborhood discrepancies, and I would also say kind of making the intent clear with the proposed required variation, while also allowing you, the property owner, more freedom in realizing the intention of that. So it's hopefully going to create more opportunities for different homeowners to express their individuality, while also still removing many of those kind of quirks and redundancies and additional onerous barriers that could inhibit middle housing.
Thank you for that explanation. And one of the places that I had noticed that there was some removal, and I did not note the page number, so I apologize, was just on some requirements, for example, on, open space and play areas. Are those just got moved to a different section?
Correct. Much of the open space has been moved to a new section, or a heavily amended section.
Great.
It has been moved to the open space chapter. That chapter is at the Planning Commission right now, so it will come to council later in the summer or early in the fall for review. But that's where you'll see it, and that's where it's moved to.
Great. Thank you very much. That, I think, closes out that item for me. Are there any follow-up comments? Council Vice President Forsyth.
So I was just hanging on the 15 feet separation versus the 10 feet separation that I believe it currently is. Is that correct?
For R4,
For R4.
the baseline is 10, yeah.
Yeah, currently is 10, but we're looking to move to 15. Am I reading that correctly? Or am I understanding that wrong?
Let's try that again. So the building separation minimum for the proposed neighborhood residential zone is 5 feet.
Okay.
For R4, generally, it's 10 feet, but there's a sub-provision which says in a handful of neighborhoods, it is actually 15 feet.
Which is a lot of neighborhoods. Education Hill, North Redmond, Willows, Rose Hill. That's a lot of our single-family neighborhoods, right? So I guess the question on requiring more separation is, how does that help us achieve our potential lot division, middle housing, getting more middle housing if we're requiring more space between?
I miscommunicated. The proposed regulations in front of you would reduce the building separations
Okay, there we
from the
go.
status quo.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? All right, well, then I will just say, did I miss anyone's questions on here? Councilmember Nueva Camina.
I was waiting until we wrapped up that specific one to come back and more of a general comment for those who are listening and following along, because as soon as we start talking about middle housing, we talk about home ownership opportunities. Then, of course, the question of why can't we convert our apartments to condos? Inevitably always comes up. So just for those that are following along that maybe haven't been part of that conversation for some time, what is our general reasoning for that?
I think actually many multifamily units are built to condominium standards. Condominium law is still a frustrating, still a frustrating piece of liability created for building owners. So as a practical matter, many of them don't actually become condominiums because of the liability associated with them unless they're building a concrete and steel building. So basically the truth of it is that there are limitations basically and a lot of litigation associated with condos that prevents or disincents developers from building them and offering that as a product. So the conversions probably could happen at some point in time because many buildings are built to a standard that would enable condominiums, but builders choose not to do that as a general principle. The other thing is that change will probably take a bit of time because people are historically risk averse, and the laws on condominium change have changed over the course of years, even though they still need additional reforms. But then you have to wait a period of time to have those rules and regulations litigated to create new case law that adjusts the liability that people are planning for right now under the current codes. So it's not likely we'll see that anytime in the near future, but it's not as a result of a city impediment.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. There was one question which I think Council Vice President Forsyth touched on in a variety of comments and that you had brought up that I just wanted to follow up on so we can address it as it's maybe part of these regulations. You mentioned about the short-term rentals policy, and there are a lot of cities that are looking at a lot of different ways to address this. Can you clarify what is within our current proposal around short-term rentals? Is there anything there, and is there any opportunity for us to look at that issue as part of 2050?
There are no proposed short-term rental regulations in the Redmond 2050 package. At this point, it would be difficult to conduct a thorough analysis and generate a recommendation for the Planning Commission to review and for you to review prior to this fall when council will be expected to take action. There is always 2025 for looking at that, unless we juggle things around and do that and don't do something else.
Great. Well, thank you. And yeah, I think that's, a topic that I think would be interesting to follow up perhaps as a first docket item. Any other comments or questions on this? Otherwise, it sounds like we have one pending item. Perhaps we can actually just put a touch on that in committee so we can get some of that information and then follow up if council members are good with that, so we don't need to do a full study session.
I have one suggestion where we could incorporate that easily into the schedule that we already have underway. Is one of the questions was when you would see, for instance, inclusionary zoning topics. It would punt that question of the gross floor area to later in the year, but in July, Planning Commission will be taking on that inclusionary zoning topic, and then that will come back to you on October 8th. On October 8th, the Planning Commission chair and vice chair are actually going to be present at the meeting when that inclusionary material comes forward, and it would be an opportunity for you to ask them about the conversation that they had, since it is just, it's not, I'm not saying it's a de minimis issue, but it is a easily identifiable issue that they could speak to at that time.
That makes sense to me. Are council members good with waiting until October to wrap up that piece, knowing that we'll get it wrapped up before we do the final adoption on 2050? I'm not seeing any no's, seeing some nodding heads. So let's go ahead with that. And I think it sounds like maybe we don't need another study session on this topic unless anyone objects. Okay, not seeing any objection. Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you. I'm fine with that. And my one follow-up was on the waste stream question.
And we can send you an email about that.
Perfect. Thank you.
That'd be great. And in the meanwhile, if there are any follow-up questions on the 4,900 versus 4,500 from council members, and any of that could be sent, if there's information that are common to the whole council, that would be helpful so we can just be more informed for that final conversation. Councilmember Stewart?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to maybe as a closing thought, because there's not a lot of new information really to consider regarding the 45 or the 49. There's not a lot of new, and I know that there are probably planning commissioners watching this meeting, and I just, our indecision on it tonight is kind of taking seriously the time that they invested in the decision. So I actually really like the elegant solution where we'll get to hear from a couple of them in October to hear a bit more about it. Again, it's not a conversation that's going to affect lots and lots of lots in Redmond, but it is a conversation that mattered enough for them to put in the work. And so that's, from my perspective, that's kind of what I'm trying to balance here tonight. So make sure that that was understood. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. And if there are no other comments, then I think we will wrap up this item and say thank you so much to our planning staff for all of the great information, the hard work on this, and huge thanks to our Planning Commission for really thinking deeply about all these questions and sending us such a thoughtful recommendation. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you for the discussion.
All right, the next item and final item on our agenda is council talk time. I will bring up a couple of items for council talk time, and then happy to open it up to others who have any items to bring up with the council. Just wanted to follow up with you all. Council Vice President Forsyth and I were able to follow up with Derek Wing about opportunities for council engagement with the public, following up on some of the feedback everyone had given. So what he proposed in terms of ideas around conversations or town halls or other pieces would be for us to have conversations with council either on a quarterly or every other month basis where we could set up actually each time in a different place around the city where people could come and speak with council members. We could set up either tables and kind of split up, focused on different topics where people could come and sit down and talk with us. And we were thinking for the first one to be able to have one in September in Downtown Park. So responding to the long time ask for us to be able to have a notice meeting in Downtown Park. Wouldn't be an official business meeting, but would have the opportunity where we could kind of set up some opportunities for people to come and sit and talk with us about different topics. We were discussing whether or not we'd want to have one focused topic per conversation with council, or whether we might actually just break up per table. I had the idea that we could have, a housing table, environment table, ask me anything table, and then we could switch partway through. But I just wanted to throw out those ideas and to get council feedback. If that sounds good, I think we could start with just setting up the opportunity where council members could come. We'll create kind of that space. We're thinking the second one we could have at the Redmond Senior and Community Center, because it'll happen during the rainy time of the year. And then, be able to maybe have the next one over in the Overlake neighborhood in the springtime in Estera Park or some other area, and kind of go from there. But just wanted to check in on whether that sounds like a good option, or whether council members would be looking for more of a formal town hall type of option instead. I think we thought we took away from conversations that people wanted to have more of an option to have conversation, but just wanted to open that up first just to get feedback from folks on that. I see a thumbs up there. Councilmember Fields?
I think those sort of, that format you described where you split up the council and split up the topics has value. And I think that should be part of these series of meetings. But I think it's really important. People don't want to just talk to council members. They want a large group discussion where they're heard by other members of the community and they get to hear the council's response to their questions in front of everybody else. So we did that a couple of times way back when. I think it was really important for developing that credibility and that trust with the community that we're willing to step into the fire and answer their questions in front of their neighbors. When we're separated, it's completely different. So whatever this series of meetings includes, it should include something, as you put it, a more formal town hall.
Council Vice President Forsyth?
Thanks for the feedback. I think a combination, like you just suggested, of having at least one of those, and maybe we host that one at the Senior Community Center, where it is a more formal town hall style. But I like the opportunity for us to be getting out in, say, the different parks throughout the year, and having the more casual, low barrier, because we do have a lot of community members who a formal format might be intimidating to them. So I think the opportunity to do both is a good mix.
Councilmember Nueva Camino?
Thank you. I was just echoing what Council Vice President Forsyth had said, just acknowledging that while some people most definitely want us to, they want to be heard by their neighbors, as well as Councilmember Fields said, for us to step into the fire and be there. There are many where they appreciate a more intimate audience with us. So having both, so we can be of service to more of the community.
Councilmember Stewart?
Thanks. I think this is awesome. And I love the idea that, these are the first few and we continue to rotate around the neighborhoods and, make sure we're getting out to see everyone and meet everyone where they're at. So I like the direction of this. Thanks.
Great. All right. Well, we will continue on with that. Also wanted to, yes?
Just want to add one thing, just for expectation and level setting. We probably would not do the town hall style until the winter, probably 25, just to level set for everyone, because of the timeline with budget coming up. We have Derby Days where we're going to be out on the front pavilion, and the September Art Walk where we're going to have a booth opportunity for council members to be there. Just want to make sure everyone's on the same page.
Yeah, which were actually the items I was going to touch on there. But I do think, unless others object, yeah, we were thinking about all the things that we're going to be asking of council members to do in the evenings in the upcoming fall, and that we could start with these community conversations in the park in September, but could look for the next one to be the more formal town hall format for the early winter. Councilmember Salahuddin?
Yeah, I agree with what's been said in that combination of meetings. I do appreciate that you've spoken with Derek on this, because I think making sure that we're advertising as heavily as possible, I want to ensure that we reach as many communities, as many pockets, and try to get a wide range of community voices at these meetings.
Council Vice President Forsyth?
Just to follow up on that, that was one thing that we did talk about, was when we have one, that we have the other one programmed so we can announce when the next one is at the one we're currently at, and making sure that we've got that regular rhythm to it. So.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree that making it clear that this is a series and you can expect to have kind of regular opportunities as touch points with your council out in community is what we're going for. So yeah, as we get that date nailed down, we will be letting you all know, and hopefully we can pick a date that will work for most people. So look for more requests for me for dates from all of you and your availability. Yeah, and as Council Vice President Forsyth mentioned, I did want to highlight, there'll be a sign-up sheet going out soon for Derby Days for kind of time slots. As we talked about, we're going to be sitting on the front porch of City Hall, which is kind of the front steps of City Hall will be set up with some chairs for us to sit at along with city staff, and then also we'll be inviting our commissioners to join us as well throughout the time at Derby Days to be able to answer the public's questions and do some fun things with them. We also I think, need to make some additional plans around parades. So I probably will be sending an email out. But if anyone has had any new great ideas on things that you want to do in the parade, please reach out. Otherwise, we're going to work on getting a couple details planned, parameters for all of us for parade participation at Derby Days. And then we are planning on having a table at the downtown Redmond Art Walk, hopefully right next to other city staff. And that's only a couple hours total. So probably council members who participate will only need a table an hour or so, and then can go and enjoy the art walk. So just make sure that you get that on your calendar. And then the last thing that I just wanted to actually, no, I had two things. Last thing I wanted to highlight before just a scheduling question is that I wrote you all in an email today about this, but just wanted to follow up on the Respect, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion and Anti-Racism draft plan that we discussed at our retreat, and how we'll be following up on that. So we've connected COO Files and Anita, took a lot of the feedback from the retreat, and are working on adding some pieces into the draft that I distributed to you all, which was the one that we looked at the retreat of that staff had come up with around the READY plan, to also include actions for council and some roles and responsibilities based on the brainstorm that we did during the retreat. But I did want to give you all the option, should you see something and really want to make sure when you're looking through it that something gets into the next draft that we'll see, which will have some ideas put in there, that you could send to COO Files any ideas. But please try to do it in the next week, as they're trying by later this month to get that draft ready so that we can then schedule a study session with Anita where the public can actually be seeing some of this. But Council Vice President Forsyth and I will be reviewing what Anita kind of came up with and COO Files from listening to our past conversations of some additional things, and be giving some input so that when the public first sees this draft, they will see some actions for council in there, even though we'll also have the chance during the study session to give our input on additional items that we'd like to see. So, so anyway, that was just a little bit on process since we've spent a lot of time on that, and to let you know that in the next several months, we can also look forward to having a study session on this really awesome plan that we're doing in our city, and then hopefully moving towards adoption and implementation. And then last, I did want to just go around and have council members, because we've emailed, but we haven't gotten all the info of if folks could flag just going through July, if there are going to be any dates that you will not be here in person, because we are trying to get everyone scheduled to be able to do a group photo. And I'd love to be able to identify if there's one date that we'll all be here in person, but I figured it'd be easier if we just did a go around, and if there's a date that you will not be here in person, to just speak up. So I'll kick it off by asking Councilmember Stewart to share any dates you will not be here in person.
The only Tuesday that I will not be in Redmond is the 5th Tuesday in July, which council is taking off.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Councilmember Nueva Camina? Apologies for putting you on the spot. We can go to Councilmember Salahuddin while you look at your calendar, I can see.
Yeah, as of now, I should be here every
Okay.
Tuesday.
Council Vice President Forsyth?
So in the past, we normally do this before a regular business meeting because we're normally dressed up more for those. So that would be I would lobby for that, and I should be available for either of those.
Okay, great. And Councilmember Fields?
July 16th, not here.
Okay.
I have no conflicts.
No conflicts. Okay, great. Thank you. And Councilmember Nueva Camina, did you have any?
July 23rd, I will not be here.
Okay, great. So I will be working with Chip to get us, and we'll check in with the mayor's schedule, because we need all of us, plus the mayor, to take that great group photo to hang on the wall. It's just been waiting for us. So those are all my items. Is there other items for council talk time? Seeing none, if there are no items for the good of the order, this meeting is adjourned.